So we are grateful to have you with us for our third virtual Super Sunday. And actually, Sherry Hepner, who was our presenter at the last Super Sunday from the Convalescent Home of Winnipeg, has joined us too. It's great to see you, Sherry, and everyone else. And there may be others who are joining us, but really want to welcome Tessa, who is the Executive Director of the 1JustCity organization, which is the outreach ministries of the United Church in the Winnipeg area. So, without further ado, we've had you before in person, and we're thrilled to have you online with us.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I kind of got I know that you had an update recently from Josh Ward. So Josh is our community facilitator at our West End location and just does a fantastic job leading an ever-growing team there with ever-growing more programming. And so my role is Linda at West Broadway Community Ministry. So they are operationally a part of 1JustCity now as well. So trying to increase our own capacity to be efficient by having kind of one set of books and one set of tracking and all of that. But a big piece of my role in the winter months, which I was asked to focus on a little bit, is managing Just a Warm Sleep. So Just a Warm Sleep is Winnipeg's only no barrier space. And so I think there's a lot of components that make up being no barrier. But the most important, I think, is that we don't segregate by gender in our space. So a lot of people that are experiencing homelessness together as a couple, if they want to access shelter and happen to be a couple of opposite gender, when they go to access shelter, they're separated. And so we have a lot of regulars that are couples who, depending on their mental health and what else is going on in their life, say, if we have to be separated, I'm not sleeping anyway, so there's no point in accessing shelter. So one of the things that we allow is for people to sleep adjacent or at least in the same room. So that's a big piece of being no barrier. Another piece is that we allow people experiencing homelessness with fur loved ones in their family. We didn't actually have any dogs this year. I think with COVID, there was just a different kind of demographic that we saw this year. But normally we have some resident dogs in the space. And one night we had a cat. But so we allow people to not have to make the decision between accessing shelter for their own safety and leaving that pet maybe unattended or definitely outside, and instead can kind of bring them in and be in a separate area with their pet from other folks who might be allergic or a little bit nervous about pets. And lastly, we allow people that have been using substances. So that's very similar to another partner of ours, like We Too 4, as well as Main Street Project. So people who are experiencing the trauma of homelessness and coping with that, sometimes coping with cold by using substances, and then that can lead to addiction. Sometimes, their substance use is part of what led them to experience homelessness. So we're a no barrier space in that kind of, if you can follow the code of conduct, which is to be safe, to be respectful, and to be kind, then you can be in the space with us. One of the coolest things I think about Just a Warm Sleep is that it actually started from a tweet. So Michael Redhead Champagne, when he was leading Aboriginal Youth Opportunities, was responding to the need, or I guess the failure really, of Winnipeg institutions to keep people safe after we lost a relative on the street in the winter in December of 2016. And 1JustCity, of course, is United Church founded, has many Anglican Church partners. And so when we talk about who we are and what we do, a lot of people understand our linkage to the church. And so the tweet said, "Hey, churches, could you let our relatives in?" And so I saw that because I, at the time, handled our social media and thought, oh, we are being called right before Christmas to try to figure out how to be the manger. Okay, how do we answer that call? And so at the time, we knew we had just been doing some tracking and research between our 3 locations. So there's St. Matthew's Maryland Community Ministry in the West End, West Broadway Community Ministry in West Broadway, aptly named, and then Oak Table in Osborne Village. And we knew that our Oak Table location was the location that had the most individuals experiencing poverty, as well as homelessness. So many folks might contain their apartment, and so they might come to us for food. And so we have a big community of that at all of our locations. But at the time, our largest community of people who had nowhere to sleep at night was at Oak Table. So I approached Augustine United Church with that question. I said, can you be the manger? Can we figure it out? And so they pulled together a meeting early January 2017, and we opened late January 2017 for Just a Warm Sleep. At the time with a capacity of 15 people, and only being allowed to be open when it was below -10. Because that is when emergency cold measures are allowed to be put into place. So we've since worked with the city of Winnipeg to be allowed to be open consistently. So we're now open from this year, December 24th to March 31st. So we opened literally on Christmas Eve. So I'm kind of trying to live out 5 years later, that notion of being the manger and being open for folks. And that first night we had a couple. And they said, you know, this is the place that we prefer because we get to be together. And they stayed with us until they accessed housing actually in the middle of March, which was really exciting for them and for our team too, because ultimately the goal would be that we don't need to do Just a Warm Sleep in the future. And that's definitely something that we would welcome in terms of being able to ensure that that meant that people had housing and safe places to be instead. So
do you ever get children? Like, are a whole family coming? Or
we've had whole families, especially newcomer and immigrant families. That's happened. But we aren't a space. Normally, they would spend maybe that night with us if we couldn't get them into a more appropriate space right away, or we would refer them to an appropriate space. So when we have youth under the age of 24, we send them to We24 because that's the youth space. And then conversely, if We24 gets somebody 24 and up, they might send them to us. So we work really collaboratively with the other shelters and spaces, just to kind of make sure that everybody's accessing the best resource for them. We did have a family with an adult child. I think he was like 19 or 20. They stayed with us a fair bit. Not this year though, that was last year. But, and then again, found housing eventually. Yeah. So one of the core pieces of Just a Warm Sleep is that we work collaboratively with Bear Paw Security. So we have intake staff and intake volunteers, and we have morning staff and morning volunteers. But overnight, the space is supported by Bear Paw. And Bear Paw is an Indigenous owned and Indigenous run security company, not to be confused with Bear Clan. And Bear Paw security team is great. And when I approached the owner, I said, you know, I want to make sure that people in the space feel like you're there to make them safe. So they do training with an elder in the summer around trans inclusivity, around addictions and harm reduction, and then come and just absolutely, you know, kind of rock that space with compassion and caring for the folks that they're seeing. And that we're supporting in that space. So this year, one of the kind of coolest things that we got to do at Just a Warm Sleep, besides expanded hours, so we used to be open 9 to 7. We got some extra funding, partly because everything else is closed during COVID. So most of our guests, for example, are so well read. And I always was like, why? And then COVID hit, and I realized it's because normally they're hanging out at the library. And so now they're, you know, don't have that place to go and hang out. And so we got some funding to open at 8 p.m. instead of 9, and to stay open till 8 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. So that was a huge thing for our guests, because it kind of just meant that they only had 12 hours to figure out being outside. And of course, Oak Table and St. Matthew's have been open during the day, so they had other spaces that they could rely on during the day. But another really big piece is that we worked in partnership with some restaurants this year, and actually have flowed close to 100,000 meals now to community, not just to 1JustCity, but to an additional 11 other nonprofits in Winnipeg. But part of that was that we got to do meals for Just a Warm Sleep. And so that's something we're going to have to figure out doing moving forward. It was a dynamic shift in terms of how rested people got, how calm they were when they could come into the space and be offered a nice, warm, filling meal. It kind of just, when you're not hungry, you're not angry as much. And so it made a really big difference in terms of guests' ability to have a calm and restful night. So, and then in the morning, we also had breakfast. So if they left on time, because sometimes we struggle with guests wanting to leave on time, totally reasonable. It's hard to go out into the cold. So if guests left on time, they also go to breakfast as they left. And then of course, if they were running late, our volunteers had to move on to cleaning the space. So it was a good motivator. We had nobody leave late this year. So those are some things. And one of the best things about, Just a Warm Sleep is because it's small. So only 30 guests a night. People experiencing different types of mental health issues find it to be a little less overwhelming. So we had, and then it's also about building along our core pillars. So the core pillars at 1JustCity is to love people where they're at and love people who might identify as underloved. So that can look like socks. It often looks like a place to sleep in the winter. And it definitely looks like knowing people and their stories and how to support them. The second piece is working towards reconciliation. So we do a lot of work around Indigenous cultural programming in our daytime program sites, and then building individuals' capacity. And the last one is building inclusive community. And so that one at Just a Warm Sleep is interesting because we do have a lot of sleepers who have night terrors because they live with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so then it's interesting kind of explaining to folks who are reacting to someone who's screaming in their sleep really negatively that like, you don't know it because you're sleeping, but you also really snore. And this space is about everybody feeling safe and welcome. So, we're going to wake that person up. We're going to have a conversation with them. We're going to try to calm them down, but they are just as welcome here as you are. And explaining that night terrors come from, in this case, for the two individuals this winter, post-traumatic stress. And so what that is and what it means and how we might support someone going through that. So one of our regulars who had that issue this year is a veteran. And so he would kind of dream about different explosions and then wake up panicked, wanting to find his comrades and kind of talk him down and let him know that that isn't where he was in this moment and that we understood that is somewhere he had been a lot. And but also, breaking the rules a little bit sometimes. So you're not really supposed to leave after lights out. Sometimes he needed to go for a walk and come back into the space. So being able to be flexible because we're small means that we can serve some people who can't be served by places that can't have as much flexibility because they have 120 guests a night.
What do you get to sleep on now? You're not using the mats anymore, right?
We're not using the plastic bag mats.
Yeah.
We Foam Solutions, which is a Winnipeg company, donated 30 exactly the same mats. So they are 3 feet by 6 feet and about 3.5 inches thick. Lots of our guests find them comfortable. My husband and I slept on them one night in the church supervising a sleepover. It wasn't the best sleep of my life, but they're really good and they're easy to clean and they're bedbug preventable and all of that. So they're a really good, and it's nice to have them all be identical. So when Just a Warm Sleep first started, we were using all of the same, we were using just kind of donated mats. And so there was some diversity. So some people got a more comfortable sleep than others. So having 30 that are identical are great. We can't do blankets yet because until last week, we did not have laundry on site. So a huge thing that's happened for Just a Warm Sleep Future and for Oak Table is the renovation of Augustine Center's lower level. And so Augustine United Church, for those that don't know, created a charity called Augustine Center that will kind of manage the building in perpetuity to ensure that it continues to be there for the outreach and other kind of programming. So there's a daycare going into the building that matters for that community in that area. So Augustine Center's lower level has been renovated and now we have laundry on site. So we need to figure out with our permits what's allowed for next year in terms of finally maybe being able to offer blankets, etc. But in the past, we haven't been able to because they won't even let you think about it from a permitting perspective until you have laundry on site.
Do people bring their own blankets and
if whatever they bring with them, they can use so long as they take it with them in the morning. Yeah. Most people are wearing such heavy winter clothing though,
Yeah,
that they don't
need it.
maybe, yeah, they don't really need a blanket, or they might use their winter clothing as blankets. Yeah. So a tweet 5 years later, uh, here we are. And one of the fun things that we do to raise money for Just a Warm Sleep is a winter triathlon called Beat the Cold. So Beat the Cold is a 3-sport event. Typically it's been skating, don't worry, we're not having anybody swim in the winter, but skating, running, and cycling. But this year it was virtual because we obviously can't get athletes together. And so people just got to do any 3 sports that they wanted to outside, or any 3 legs of the same sport. So there was people who just walked 5 kilometers 3 times, for example. And we actually are going to be doing it again in the summer. We're calling it Beat the Heat. And it's going to fundraise for our summer programming, which is one of, I think a really important thing when I think about the youth that we serve in the summer. So I would say typically in the winter, we see some kids under the age of 5. But in the summertime, we start seeing kids of all ages. And we see kids who go back to school in the fall and are interacting in their classrooms with people who have all of these stories about all of the cool things that they got to do in the summer. And without us, those youth wouldn't have stories of their own to share. So we take families that can afford it, strawberry picking. We take families that would have no way to get to Birds Hill to the beach for a day on a bus. We take families to different sports and different educational opportunities. We take families to, when it's been safe in the past, different sort of outdoor events. So this year, we're going to continue to do that in the socially distanced safe ways that we can. And so Beat the Heat will help us fundraise for things like sunscreen and water bottles and bathing suits and the bus to Birds Hill and so on. There's already people asking about if strawberry picking will happen or if COVID is going to ruin it. A very eager 13-year-old that we see who really loved it last year. And so Beat the Heat is coming up. And again, it'll be virtual and people can do any amount of legs that they want. Just have a goal of 15 kilometers and raise funds for those kind of essential programs to allow kids when they're going back to school to have something to share about their summer, but also to get some of those experiences that many of us might take for granted, like going to the beach with your family. So Beat the Cold this year actually had the more athletes than last year. And because it was virtual, we had no costs. So like not none, but we had about $4,000 of costs. Normally the event would be over 10, just with insurance and paramedics and all of the things you need to have at a live event. So we raised $28,000 this year, which was fantastic, and is part of how we got to open early in December and part of how we got to make sure that we could continue up the meals and other essentials that were making Just a Warm Sleep run so smoothly, both for the guests and having a more lovely experience and our team. So Beat the Heat is coming up, and will be an exciting event, likely the first week of August. And then in future years, we are partnered with a couple triathlon geniuses through Trifactor, which is a local triathlon club. And so they helped us plan last year's live triathlon. It ended up being the last of the season because of COVID, because it was in February. And then they'll help us plan future events. And so eventually we hope to have a summer triathlon in Transcona, which doesn't normally happen, but there's a lake there for wakeboarding, and I'm hoping we can get permissions to use it. Yeah.
You're hiring some new cultural Indigenous leaders too. I know there's one at the West End, but you're getting 2 more to start in June.
Yeah. So our goal was always to have someone at each location, and then have somebody who kind of had a more leadership role over the team to support them to do bookings and get programming in the space. Unfortunately, actually, one of them at one of our locations last year got sick with COVID. And has decided, based on their immuno situation moving forward, that they can't come back, which is like, they're fantastic. And it's really devastating what COVID can do to somebody, especially considering she's like a young, healthy woman at the time. So we have Lori, who's been at the West End location, going on 2 years, and is just absolutely fantastic and really grown into be an essential part of our leadership team. So she's getting promoted. So currently she was the Indigenous Cultural Safety Leader at the West End location. So one of the things that we really want to do is make sure that our team that's on site as much as possible represents those that we serve as well. So we have a lot of diversity on our team. We have a lot of Indigenous people, people of color, people identify as trans or queer, and are working to continuously be cognizant of that as we hire. Lori, as Indigenous Cultural Safety Leader, a big part of it was about making sure that there was visible Indigenous leadership in the drop-in. So she's getting promoted to be our Indigenous Cultural Programmer, which means she'll supervise the 2 other cultural safety leaders at Oak Table and West Broadway when we get to hire. Those job postings are going up on Monday, actually, in case you know anybody. And so those other 2 positions will be 20-hour-a-week positions, and they will be at their respective locations, kind of supporting the daily drop-in functions, but also, last year, for example, we organized a bunch of medicine picking. We had a demonstration powwow. We actually just got a grant to get 7 or 6 sewing machines. And we're doing a grandparents and grandchildren first regalia club. So grandparents will be helping get regalia ready for new powwow dancers.
That was neat. It's already posted up on your 1JustCity, the positions, and that I happen to be reading it. And
we're putting it like on job search sites on Monday. Right. They're up there already though.
And you're also planning some Indigenous cultural field trips. I saw you going to the art gallery, and then the museum, and then something about St. George's Day, but I'm not sure. Then it said Newfoundland in the bracket.
So I think we're going on St. George's Day. And so in June, Lori will have kind of this whole team. We don't know who those folks will be yet, but we'll be focusing in our social media more on the Indigenous culture programming and the growth of that program. But we go medicine picking. And the powwow last year was super fun. It was a super great experience, and many people weren't actually getting to attend as many powwows as they normally would have. So it was a nice way to bring community together and make sure that still got celebrated. So one of the things that we do at 1JustCity around social media, so when I'm like, in June, we're actually really focusing on that, is try to kind of pick ways to bring to light important things, both for our work, but also for our guests to understand. So actually this month is all about West Broadway. We have an intern there who's kind of expanding the larger 1JustCity network's understanding of the work that happens at that location. But for May, the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation is doing a takeover of 1JustCity social media to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're also and tying them to our work. So actually a previous intern of ours found full-time employment in communications after doing a communications internship with us, and is now at the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation. So he'll be able to tie our work really closely to the Sustainable Development Goals, because he's been a part of us for a long time and continues to volunteer sometimes. Kind of giving an opportunity both for our guests who are accessing services, or our volunteers, or just people in general who connect with us on social media, to learn more about what those goals mean. And the first goal is no poverty. So kind of talking about what that might mean realistically. So this week, through the United Church Action on a Guaranteed Livable Income, we were, sharing some of that social media content, but also, having our staff participate in the day of lighting candles, and trying to make sure that people understand that if we gave people the capacity to meet their basic needs, they actually could start to focus on thriving. And instead, we're pushing people into a position where all they can do is focus on surviving. So really pushing for a guaranteed livable income as a response to that.
Maybe we can see if is there anybody else that would like To ask Sherry or Tessa, sorry, a question. I'm looking at Sherry's picture.
Okay, would you like some fabric or thread or things like that?
Yes. So if
Donated?
yeah, if you email volunteer@onejustcity.ca, I'm sure that they would love that.
Okay, well, I'll ask them then if they just want cottons or whether they want silky stuff,
Yeah.
whatever. Okay.
They would know, I don't know. Yeah, we're really, one of our staff is actually the owner of Laura's Under There, which is a genderful underwear company that creates underwear for everybody and all sizes. And so we're really lucky that we have like a team of fantastic people who can sew, which is why we've run events like So Much Love in the past. And actually a big part of how we got through the pandemic was that we emailed our So Much Love folks and said, can you sew us masks and smocks? And the response was overwhelming. We've contributed over 10,000 masks just to like the wider community, and then I had enough masks to also run the programming we were doing on site.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's Laura Everett, right?
Laura
she was,
Everett, yeah.
She presented at Herald,
Yes.
probably 3 or 4 years ago now.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, some folks might remember her. Yeah. Great story.
In our reading group, we read Jesse Thistle's From the Ashes, and he said that he didn't like to stay in shelters because there was so much stealing. Is that a problem for you people? Do you find that people get along well together?
We do find that people get along well together. I think one of the things for our shelter that's different is that it's all one room. So it's pretty clear whose is what. And people now, especially with COVID, are asked not to really get off their mat unless they're using the washroom. So it hasn't been a big issue to have. We know that we've had guests that have been afraid about stealing because they've had that experience other places. And I think other places, you know, for guest dignity have created more divisions so that people can kind of have a little bit of privacy. But if you can have a little bit of privacy and somebody can sneak into that space when you're not paying attention, then theft is a bigger concern. Whereas if you're just in one giant room and there's 2 security guards, it's a little harder. So we've been really fortunate in that way to not have that be a big concern. Knock on wood.
Do all the shelters
I
have
saw
security?
Virginia's hand up.
Oh, sorry, Virginia.
Oh, that's okay. I'm on Craig's computer and my own is, well, never mind the computer chaos at our place. But I have a friend who's been one of your volunteers at Just a Warm Sleep and was kind of surprised when he referred to JAWS. Does anybody else call it JAWS? And but maybe you could say something about what your volunteers do at Just a Warm Sleep.
Yeah, so JAWS is just a nice acronym, but also we talked initially. I think it was someone at Augustine that started calling it the JAWS program, and then they're like, you know, like get out of the jaws of the cold. So it kind of stuck. But yeah, Just a Warm Sleep. So Just a Warm Sleep volunteers have a variety of roles, but big piece of it is to kind of build relationships with folks. And that's actually like I think 80% of the volunteering that's available at 1JustCity is getting to know people and their experiences. It's why we love volunteers that come back year after year, or can, you know, maybe do once a month, but be kind of consistent so that they have an opportunity to build relationships, and the people that they build those relationships with don't later feel kind of abandoned. But getting to know folks and what's going on for them so that we can make the most appropriate referrals and supports available to people in need. I think, you know, then there's also like the practical tasks. So during COVID, for example, we had volunteers who sanitized the bathroom every time somebody used it. Pardon me. And then we had people who, you know, helped hand out meals, helped, you know, make sure that the breakfasts were ready for the next day. People who helped clean the space before or after use, and people who helped with intake. And then another really cool thing is helping people with paperwork. So sometimes somebody's experiencing homelessness and it's very new to them, and they might actually qualify for EIA, or they might qualify for disability, or they might need paperwork just to get an ID, and that's actually the barrier to having an apartment or a place to live. And so a lot of volunteers, when those relationships get established, or our staff team, of course, work on making sure that we print that off for people and then spend time with them filling it out. And it's amazing, like just vicariously, the stories my staff share about how honored and overwhelmingly supported and emotional people get when you help them with paperwork, because they don't have anyone else who's willing to do that with them. And it feels daunting. Sometimes there's a second language issue, sometimes there's a literacy issue, but most of the time it's actually that people have been experiencing homelessness for a length of time without proper glasses, and they actually just can't see the form. And so they can read, and when they ask for help, people treat them like they can't read, and that's really hurtful for them. And it's that they can't read now because they don't have the glasses to see. So before COVID, we were working with an optometrist to try to get them on site. But then with COVID, that unfortunately got put on pause, and we're sort of still waiting for the COVID pause to end. Yeah.
Very interesting to hear about all the different aspects of your work, Tessa. Very
well, and it's the team's work. I you know,
yeah,
I
sure.
just run around making sure I can continue paying them. Yeah.
As you know, we have done lots of different fundraisers at Harrow, and of course, some of them haven't happened because of COVID. And our friends who came up with this soup fundraiser are brilliant, but how much has that impacted you with churches being less able to offer financial support?
I think the biggest impact for us has actually been on our emergency food program. So many churches, when they gathered on Sunday, would have a bin, and people would fill that bin with kind of those long shelf life food items that could fill our pantry. We have relationships with Safeway, we have relationships with Cobb's Bread. So the things that go bad quickly, we're still able to get and give out. But the things that, you know, a church might have collected for 2 months and then brought over, that was like canned tuna and craft dinner, that's been a really big impact, because at the same time that churches haven't been able to do, and some still have, some have figured out, you know, interesting networks of porch drop-offs and contactless pickups. But during COVID, the need for that program has increased almost 200%. And at the same time, we've seen, you know, less engagement than normal, for good reason. Churches aren't getting together as much and are trying to figure out getting, you know, technology to their community members so that they can be involved, and, you know, it's all good. But that's been, I think, one of the most significant shifts for us, is trying to figure out different ways. So we've been doing some social media campaigns, we've been raising some awareness, we had some workplaces do some drives, and of course, thanks to the Winnipeg Foundation and United Way, we've also received some funding to try to make up some of those gaps, and that's helped us make sure that we can continue to meet that unfortunately growing need in the community.
And if people wanted to just take a box of food from their home down to any of those 3 ministries, they'll be glad to accept it. They all have food banks that they offer, right? I don't know about Oak Table, but I've given to the other 2. But
Yeah, for sure. We would be graciously excited to accept that. Each of the locations does some of the emergency food, and actually Oak Table took on. So one of the other things that happened during COVID was some places stopped being able to offer some of what they used to offer. So Oak Table actually does now do a Winnipeg Harvest Food Bank because another place had to stop doing it, and so they took it on to make sure that those folks had somewhere else they could go. Yeah, and people also can make a financial contribution if they aren't currently shopping or don't want to get out of the house, and just designate it to the emergency food pantry or to anything else that kind of is feeling really important to them right now. Yeah. Yeah. Are there other questions?
I had sent you an article that I'm not sure if it was in everybody's little local paper or not, but a young girl at Maples Collegiate, actually, who was 15, had an internship at Oak Table.
Yes.
And when she was there, she did interviews with lots of the different the guests that you have. And she ended up writing a book. It's a small book. It's only about 100 pages, but it's being published this spring. And it's being used as a fundraiser for Oak Table. And I know Tessa hadn't initially seen the article, but did you get a chance to talk to Rory? Or
yeah, so Rory is actually doing she's hoping her book will be ready by summer, as you say. And then in July, she'll be doing a social media takeover of 1JustCity's account to kind of promote the book and the fundraising for Oak Table. So very exciting for her too, because we have a pretty wide reach these days. So she can try to promote that, but also learn some of those communication skills. And it's just a really big piece of our work. So there's interns that come from schools, but we also have an internship program that just allows people some of that work experience. And then whenever we can, we apply for grants to be able to do paid internships as well. So it's always exciting to see the innovation and care and energy that youth are bringing to the work that we do, and that they then kind of bring in their own way. So very excited about the content of that book, and also excited for her to have the experience of promoting it with us and sharing those stories, because I think there's a lot, you know, it's really easy to see somebody experiencing homelessness, or maybe even somebody who's, you know, currently high on meth, and just think, oh wow, that is that person's story. You know, last winter we had a 76-year-old who had lived in the same apartment since he was in his early 30s, and lost it because it got turned into condos, and kind of, you know, was in denial that was going to happen until it was too late to find something else, and ended up experiencing homelessness in the middle of winter. Found us 2 nights later, but by that point had already become addicted to meth, because it was how he stayed awake and able to walk all night instead of sitting down and getting frozen. You know, so when we think about meth use and substance use, there's so much to the reasoning and the stories behind what's leading to that for people. And so I'm really excited about her book kind of providing that compassionate insight to what people are experiencing. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other things that we could donate? Besides, well, money, of course, that you can get anything, but besides food or?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing right now is a menstrual product drive. So for too many people that experience menstruation, you know, tampons and pads are just not accessible financially. And then soon, but not yet, but we're in conversation actually this week with a storage company to see if we can start getting a storage bin sponsorship, because we want to be able to offer clothes appropriate for the season, but we know that people want to give them away at the inappropriate season. So we don't have storage for clothing. So like right now, for example, a lot of people are trying to drop off winter coats, but we have nowhere to keep them.
Okay.
Figure out something that will allow us to store those and make sure that we can give them to people when they need them. Yeah, I just got a sign that my internet is unstable. Are folks still hearing me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
You also have at least a couple of sites that do art projects with people. If people had extra art supplies that could be used, Oak Table
Yes.
and where
Well,
else?
actually, all three of our locations right now, they're kind of on hold due to COVID. But what we are doing is sending art kits home with folks who are housed. So yeah, definitely art supplies is another one that we're always gracious to accept, and also fortunate through community partners like Art City and Arts Junction to access. Yeah. I think one of the things that's going to come with the storage unit is the hope to do, and this is very preliminary in terms of its planning, but we're hoping to do like a seasonal store for our guests at each location. And so they would, based on kind of their age and their size, would get like a kit with the seasonal things. So right before, like right now, we would do the summer one, and they would get like athletic summer socks and a thing of sunscreen and a water bottle and a hat and an undershirt and breathable underwear. And then come winter, they would get a kit with warm socks and mittens and a toque, and trying to make sure that we can kind of resource people for the resources that they need in the season. Because we know that so many folks might not have a place to keep their winter coat over the summer. So right now it's going in a garbage bin. So our hope would be, we now have the ability at Oak Table, but thanks to that renovation, to do laundry and to do bed bug treatments of clothing. So instead we could say, give us your coat back. And then next year you can come to the store and get a coat. It might be the same one, might not be, but to try to reduce the environmental impact that homelessness also has, when we're thinking about people not having an opportunity to do laundry and instead having to choose to wear a new pair of socks or a new winter coat every season. So looking at that as we move forward is important to us. And one of the reasons why Oak Table, for example, has moved in their new space to all linens. So they won't have disposable napkins and etc. They'll actually have cloth napkins and tablecloths, and be able to serve people and then do laundry on site.
How do you treat the clothes if they have bed bugs?
Yeah, so it's like it's almost like you put them in an oven, but it's a special, it's like, it looks like a big closet, and you put them in there and then it cooks them at a temperature that kills the bugs, but doesn't actually start the clothing on fire. So yeah, we got a grant for that. And
There's smell to it?
no,
No?
just
I
the
guess
heat.
that's what they do in a thrift shop and that too, is it? Okay,
Yeah, it's a heat treat.
thank
It's
you.
almost like a dry cleaning closet, except it's not about cleaning like stains. It's just about
Non-chemical.
cleaning,
Yeah.
non-chemical.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's an exciting development.
Mhm.
We've been pretty lucky on the bed bug front. We're hoping to keep it that way. So this is a bit of a proactive measure.
Sure.
I thought I heard someone else start a question there.
It might have been me saying, anybody else with anything? I think, we've been here for 45 minutes or so, and so want to respect your time as well as what else other people might have on today. But any final questions or comments before I get ready to thank you for being with us?
I'll do a final comment. I think.
All right. Never short of words.
One of the things that I think is just absolutely fantastic in connecting with congregations like yours and other congregations around the city, growing up in the United Church and having people on our board and our team who grew up in Anglican churches, like we very much so understand the care that we're offering community as an extension of the care that our Christianity taught us to offer the world. And so it's always great to link back to and be reminded of the deep roots of that work in the congregations in Winnipeg. So thank you so much, both for having me to speak, for having Josh previously, maybe hint for having Lori in a couple of months to talk about Indigenous cultural programming in a more comprehensive way. And I think, this work is love and is what we're all called to do.
Well, thanks very much, Tessa. It was great. It's so nice to see how One Just City has grown and gotten so many new partners, and that the churches still are very involved. And thank you for your leadership and all that you do there. And we hope that everything continues well for you. And soon COVID maybe will get handled and you'll have even more things to do.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah. And I will come by for my soup. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me as a part of Super Sunday.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you. And thank you to Shirley and all the soup makers and all the organizers and all the rest of that too. So
That's great. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.